Moladina Talks. As you can see, me and Zara are in the same studio today and managed to get together for this very special podcast.
Every forecast that you ever see is always wrong.
Anwar is one of the authors for the book 9 Entrepreneurisms.
The system is falling apart, and that's why I call it an unboxed world.
In this episode, we talk all things entrepreneurship, artificial intelligence, where the future is going, how COVID has impacted the global economy, and much more. So make sure you stay tuned for all of that.
People who are not in this area just don't understand how fast this is going. You know, Iron Man might just happen, right? Why not?
But before we start, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe as usual.
Welcome everyone back to Moladina Talks. Today we have Anwar Jumalboy with us. Welcome Anwar to the podcast. How have you been?
Welcome and thank you. I've been well, Ali and Zara. Lovely to be on your show.
Yeah, it's been something I've been looking forward to for a while, so we can pick your brains on a lot of different topics I'm sure everyone is wondering about, wants some more information on. So that'll be great to go into. Yeah.
I'm really excited to learn more about you and what you do today as well. So thank you for coming on today.
Welcome.
So would you be able to start off with telling us a little bit about you and who you are?
Sure. So I currently, what I do is I do some keynote speaking to companies, principally around the subject of entrepreneurship. And my passion, I guess it is to bring entrepreneurial behavior into every company. So one of the problems I find is that we are all born entrepreneurial. We are entrepreneurial, we want to be, but then when we get into a job, we sort of seem to stop. And somehow the job sucks out the entrepreneurial trait that's in you. So that's something that I am passionate about, and I speak and write on that. But prior to that, I mean, I've done lots of things. I've worked in a shipyard. I ran a fast food chain. I ran operations for a budget hotel group. Twice I've tried to start my own business. Both times it did not end up too well. Once was a franchise business, and the other time, actually a couple of other times, they were tech businesses. And then I spent some time working for a venture fund as well, investing in tech companies. So I've got a bit of a sort of rounded background, I guess.
Yeah.
It's more zigzag than most people.
Yeah. Yeah, I know you wrote a book that's a really good read if anyone hasn't read it, 9 Entrepreneurisms, sorry. Would you like to tell us a bit about what your book is about and what people can get?
Yeah, sure. So you know, we thought we were being very clever by creating this word entrepreneurism. Yeah. And the word entrepreneurism was designed to tell people that entrepreneurs are not, you know, different people. They just do different things. And these are the 9 things that entrepreneurs do. And these are the 9 things that you can learn and you can do in either in your personal life or in your company. And so we thought we wanted to create a word that didn't make people jump immediately to, oh, those are their traits, or those are their, you know, so they're not traits, they're learnable, right? So, you know, the main one, for example, you start with is self-efficacy. Yeah. And self-efficacy is about what you're good at. And it's different to self-confidence, which is what you think you're good at, right? So you know, if somebody says, put on this cape and you can fly when you jump out of the building, some people might do that because they're, you know, supremely confident. But if you had self-efficacy, you wouldn't take that risk, right?
Yeah.
And so risk taking is another one which is misunderstood. So we tabled the 9 entrepreneurisms, or 9 behaviors, traits of successful entrepreneurs, and are really suggesting to companies that these are 9 things that you need to constantly think about and decide at which point of your journey, which one do you need. So you know, so some, for example, are in conflict. So risk-taking, realism. Sometimes you need to take risk, but you need to be realistic as well. And sometimes you need to be opportunistic.
Yeah.
So, you know, these are things that you have to constantly think about because, you know, entrepreneurs created the first business.
Yeah.
And then you have all these business schools coming out with these new models every few years, and they're trying to teach you, the blue ocean, or they're trying to teach you, this is the cow, and this is the honey. I mean, and all these fads last for a while, right? So you get one business school who comes up with something, then you get another business school who can't follow what the other one did, so they come up with their own metrics, and the consulting firms come up with their own metrics. And I say, look back at your history, go back 100, 200, 300 years. We were entrepreneurial. Think like an entrepreneur and work like an entrepreneur. Unfortunately, large organizations have basically asked you to park this outside the door.
Yeah.
And they don't want you to be entrepreneurial because they were built in a time, and most of the large businesses were built in a period of time where they didn't really want people. They wanted robots, but they couldn't get robots. So they got people instead.
Yeah.
And it's a very unnatural state, right? To be told everything that you're supposed to do. And what's happening today is the system is falling apart. And that's why I call it an unboxed world. The system is falling apart because young people like yourselves have so many more options.
Yeah.
In terms of what they want to do with their career, right? So they can go out and they can get a job. They don't have to join some old boring company that puts beanbags and lattes in the lobby, but really doesn't change the way it works.
Yeah.
Right. So beanbags and lattes in the library and pool tables, and it's cool people are cool people. They do cool things, and having a latte machine and a pinball machine, that doesn't make them cool. So organizations have gone about attracting young people, talented people in the wrong way.
Yeah.
They need to change the way they work, because if they don't change the way they work, these people are going to go and work for somebody else. And if they don't work for somebody else, they're going to work for a competitor, or they're going to work for a startup.
Yeah.
And they're going to beat you, right? So we're talking over Zoom. Look at the case of Eric Yuan, who created Zoom, right? I think he went to Silicon Valley in 96 or 97, joined a small company called WebEx, which had less than 20 people. And that company was subsequently acquired by Cisco. And they built this wonderful product for Cisco's client base, a nice, solid web conferencing, share documents, all the security features, all the bells and whistles, cost a bomb, which Cisco likes because they have corporate customers.
Yeah.
And when Eric approached them and said that they want to build a small light version for people like you and me, Cisco said, no, it doesn't fit with what we want. And so he left and he formed a new company. And today, I mean, ballpark, Zoom is worth half of what Cisco is worth. And Cisco has a whole plethora of products.
Yeah, exactly.
And on the market, Zoom, I think when I last checked a couple of weeks ago, Zoom had a market cap of 100 billion, and Cisco has a market cap of 250 billion.
Yeah, massive.
And I remember when Cisco started, John Chambers in 1990 predicted that internet would make phones go obsolete, and we would all be on data. I mean, it took many, many years for that to happen. But Cisco didn't put its, didn't get into the forefront of that type of communication.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's a long story. And the tragedy, of course, is that companies are driven, senior management of companies are sometimes driven by their own prejudices, and sometimes they're driven by the bonus payouts.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't make sense for them to rock the boat. And other times, they're afraid to make a mistake because they're going to get called up, and that's embarrassing. Whereas if you're a young person in a startup company, you make mistakes all the time. Nobody calls you out, right? Because everybody's making mistakes. So you experiment more. That's the tragedy of old companies that are stuck in their ways.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a lot of examples you're given in your book like that. So if anyone hasn't read that, I think we'll put the link for that in the video description.
Yeah.
You can check that out. So I'm quite curious. So if there's people who just are beginners in this sort of subject, would you like to give us a brief explanation of what an entrepreneur is and how does someone become an entrepreneur?
So the critical thing about being an entrepreneur, and the two mistakes I made when I look back, were because of two reasons. I built businesses, I tried to build a business that we didn't have we didn't have enough of a capability to do it. Right. So there were too many unknowns, and we were not able to marshal a strong enough team early enough to get over those hurdles. So the key thing for somebody who's a budding entrepreneur is to be very clear about your competencies and to understand which of these competencies you need. The interesting thing and the difficult thing for entrepreneurs is typically you need to know who has these competencies before you know which competencies they are. I mean, that's a bit of a tough one, right? So you need to know which competencies you need, or rather who has these competencies before you actually need them. Because when you need them, you need to find the people. And if you try and find them at that point in time, somehow they don't fit well into the organization. And so I always tell people who are starting a business, and if you look at all the successful entrepreneurs, they all start a business that they have competence in. They all of them have at least two founders, sometimes three. And I was asked once, actually, why does three not work? And I thought the closest analogy I could tell you was that it's very hard to sustain a marriage with three wives or two husbands. So two seems to be the natural order of things. So, you need to have competency. You need to have a partner or a co-founder, and you need to be flexible about your offering so that it moves along. Very few companies start with and that's why we call it a business frame. Very few companies start with a business model and stay completely on the model. Right? They all evolve. And so if you start with that expectation that you're going to evolve, when you evolve, it doesn't come as so much of a shock, because you go out, you test something, it doesn't work, you move, you evolve. And so you sort of find your way, right? And it happens. I mean, in Malaysia, we have our most recent unicorn, so valuation over 1 billion US, is a company that does the sale of second-hand cars without having to test drive. In other words, you buy a second-hand car on a platform, and you can take it home, try it for 2 weeks. If you don't think you got what you paid for, you return it. But there is no test drive, there's no inspection. You just read the report, you decide that you want to buy this car and you buy it. It started 5 years ago, and they first started by helping dealers buy cars. So if you imagine that you're in the UK, most cars that come for sale probably come up for sale in Manchester or London, and because these are the bigger cities, right? But the demand for these cars can be in Glasgow, or it can be in Strathclyde, or it can be down in Kent, right? By the time these guys arrange to go and see the vendor, the car might get sold. And the arbitrage opportunity exists because the cars in the outskirts sell for higher prices than the cars in the city. But those guys can't travel into the city to inspect the car. And so, the guys who founded the company, Eric and Jin, they created these standardized inspection. And so it was actually for dealers, right? So the dealer would want to buy a car, and the dealer would be 200, 300 kilometers away. He can't afford to come and see the car. And even if he does come and see the car, it might be sold, right? So they created this system, and they used to have a weekly auction. And now it's evolved into, B2C, C2C. Everybody's buying it without seeing a car. And in COVID times, it fits perfectly, right? Because you get a car, it's completely sanitized. You don't have to worry about it.
Exactly.
So they started with the business. They had a rough idea where they were going to go, and over 5 years they've evolved, and they're going to get there. So you have to have that competence. You have to have a team. And you have to go and try out your product and evolve your product.
You're right.
So some businesses are great as hobbies, and maybe they should stay as a hobby, right? There's so many now. I don't know about in the UK, but here we have so many new coffee shops. We have so many new cake and bakery outlets. We have so much home cooking being available now.
Yeah.
There's so many small businesses that have started, and they're great. You know, they make good money for the owners. They might or might not scale, but that's an option that's available to them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know, exactly.
Yeah, so we're going to move on to entrepreneurship.
Yes.
And I was just wondering, what sort of mindset would you say is common within people who go on to become successful entrepreneurs?
Passion. Because passion drives everything else, right?
Yeah.
So the mindset is, I know that this can be done better, and I am passionate about proving it. And most entrepreneurs don't necessarily get into it for the money, or at least they don't start by getting into it for the money, right?
Yeah.
They just want to solve a problem, and they're passionate about solving a problem.
Yeah.
And some of them are passionate about helping people. Others are just passionate about making things easier. And sometimes that becomes very big and it drives them into a very large business.
Yeah.
And other times, you know, it gets wiped out, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of businesses also go, you know, a lot of tech businesses are also the victims of tech.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, so you don't always say that because you're a tech business you're going to survive and you're going to do well. I mean, there's another tech business that might come and wipe you out, right?
Yeah. No, it's interesting because I remember I was listening to one of your previous podcasts and I heard how you called entrepreneurs amoral. So
Yes.
Can you explain a bit about what you meant by that?
So it caused a bit of controversy when I said that. And what I said was that entrepreneurs do not consider the morality of it.
Yeah.
Right? They decide that, and because they very often they're doing things that have not been done before, and sometimes they are doing things which are sort of against the rules, right?
Yeah.
But they decide these rules don't make sense. So that's one type of entrepreneur. Then there's another type of entrepreneur who just says that I need to do it, and if somebody gets hurt, so be it.
Yeah.
So I don't think entrepreneurs typically look at the morality of it. Entrepreneurs do it because they can do it, and they do it because they want to win.
Yeah.
And many of the entrepreneurs that I interviewed, I asked them, did you find passion first or success first? And they're very intertwined.
Yeah.
You know, they get more passionate the more successful they become.
Yeah.
And passion is also sometimes, and I talk about it in the book. You know, Venus Williams, is she passionate about tennis or is she passionate about winning?
Yeah.
And it just so happens that she can do it at tennis.
Yeah.
But she's passionate about winning, right? Look at Michael Jordan. You know, he took 1.5 seasons out to play baseball.
Yeah.
And if you talk to I've listened to the owner of the team. They also owned Michael Jordan's basketball team. And you know, he said, given time, Michael would have been a major player.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So entrepreneurs are amoral.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier how like the key principle of successful entrepreneurs is the passion that they have. And you also like in everyday life you hear people say, make a business decision, don't make an emotional decision, like take your time. So how would you say is the right way to strike that balance between detaching yourself from the emotions of the business while still maintaining that passion to drive you and motivate you to bring it to the next level?
So the passion has I sometimes I see young people and they say, oh, I'm passionate about this, and I ask them, okay, so how much you know about it? How much work have you put into it? You cannot be passionate about something and not make any effort. You know, I'm passionate about Ferraris. I don't know any damn thing about Ferrari. I've never studied it, but I'm passionate about Ferrari. I mean, you can't be, right? If you're passionate about you would know. You'd know the team. You'd know the engines. You'd know something about it, right? So passion has to have action with it. In terms of emotional decision, we all get emotional. And I don't think the two are necessarily always at crossroads, right?
Yeah.
So you're passionate about the business because you want the business to be successful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes you make decisions based on emotion, right?
Yeah.
And the reason you make decisions based on emotion is because you're not drawing up, the debit, credit, and then making a decision, right?
Yeah.
Because there's a lot that's unsaid. And so you say, okay, I'll go with my gut.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a wonderful book by Kahneman called Thinking Fast and Slow. And Kahneman is he's wrote this sort of really incredible piece of work.
Yeah.
And Malcolm Gladwell talks about the same thing in Blink. And he says, basically, we have two systems of thinking. We have one, which is our primordial, dating back to the fight flight.
Yeah.
So that system very quickly says yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. That's all it knows. It just it's zeros and ones. And then we have a slower system, which is absorbing information and thinking and these very often are in conflict.
Yeah.
Because we desire to make that quick decision. And so this part of our brain is saying, I know the answer. And the other part of the brain is saying, hang on. Do we know this? Do we know that? And then the first part of the brain is saying, no. What are you doing? You're so slow, right? We know what needs to be done. And there are so many wonderful sort of mind tricks that you can do that people do all the time. So you need to be aware that, are you making this decision why are you making this decision, right?
Yeah.
And you need to be aware, is it because it's one part of your brain saying it, or is it because it's an outcome you want?
Yeah.
And like all decisions, so what people forget is they say it was a good decision, but it didn't pan out. That's not a good decision.
Yeah.
Because if you couldn't control the outcome, then you shouldn't have gone down that path.
Yeah.
Right? So a good decision is not just a question of, framing the question. It's not just about making the right decision, but it's ensuring that you can get the outcome that you want.
Yeah.
And if you have high certainty of getting the outcome you want, then you can say it's a good decision.
Yeah.
But otherwise you just made a decision and you hope for the best. I mean, that's not great, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so people tend to forget, and they say, oh, I made a good, and the same thing with the business model. And that's how you talk about a business frame.
Yeah.
People say, oh, I had a great business idea, timing was wrong. I had a great business idea, the market was wrong. Well, that should have been part of the decision.
Yeah.
Be bold enough to say, I screwed up. Right? Don't start thinking that, oh, I got the business model right, but I got the timing wrong. Well, timing is part of a business model.
Yeah, exactly.
How the market responds is part of the business model. And if it was so easy, of course, everybody would be Elon Musk or a Peter Thiel or a Jeff Bezos, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, if only.
And in your country, you have Dyson.
Yeah.
Right? So Dyson set up a plant in Johor, which is part of Malaysia, because he couldn't get planning approval in the UK to expand his factory.
Okay.
And he got fed up with the planners, and so he set up a facility in Johor, which is still there. Eventually, of course, he got permission for his facility in the UK.
Yeah.
But at one point, he was frustrated with the decision making, and he's taken that one concept and evolved it into so many products, right?
Yeah.
And he himself, his most famous quote is, I discovered 5,670 ways of not making it.
Wow.
Until I got it right?
Yeah.
So and in his company, and I know somebody who worked for him for a while, in his company, he insists that everybody comes up with an actionable innovation every year. It doesn't matter what role you have.
Yeah.
So there are companies that manage to build in this entrepreneurial spirit, entrepreneurial way of working.
Yeah, definitely. So how do you deal with people you come across who are quite stubborn with rigid mindsets and is negatively affecting their businesses?
You have to ask, you have to ask yourself, why are they being negative,
Yeah.
right? So sometimes people are negative because they are not thinking it through,
Yeah.
or sometimes they're being negative. If you're pitching an idea to them and they're being negative about the idea,
Yeah.
I wouldn't worry too much. But I would like to know why, why do they think it doesn't work?
Yeah.
But if it's somebody that's working for you and they're being negative about a change, then typically what happens is that you need to dig, because sometimes people are negative because they're uncomfortable about what you're asking them to do.
Yeah.
And sometimes people are negative because they feel that the change is going to adversely affect them and they're not comfortable with the change, right?
Yeah.
So we have two drivers, right? We either pursue pleasure or we avoid pain. And
Yeah.
sometimes people are caught in that. So even in your day, you'll do things to avoid pain, like exercise because your wife tells you, or eat properly because your spouse or your mother tells you that. And other times you'll have chocolate because you're pursuing pleasure, right? So in your day, you always go through this cycle of sometimes it's for pain, sometimes it's avoidance of, sometimes it's for pleasure rather, and sometimes for avoidance of pain. And people in their life cycle go through the same thing.
Yeah.
So sometimes they don't want to do something because if you ask them to do it and they don't know how to do it and they screw up, they're going to get into trouble.
Yeah.
And they don't want to get into trouble.
Yeah.
So sometimes people are just, bad hires and you have to deal with it. But most times it's not the case. Most times it's you don't dig deep enough and find out that there really is an issue. They're really concerned about this change. How is it going to impact them?
Yeah.
Are they going to be less relevant, or are they going to be put in a position where they have to do something which they can't do, and they're going to look bad?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a lot more. It comes out of basic respect, right? So you have to treat people with respect and try and understand where they're coming from.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I want to talk a bit about the impact that COVID's had on the whole world, but in terms of the economic point of view. So how has it affected the whole global economy as a whole?
So COVID has done many things, right? The pandemic has changed the way that we work.
Yeah.
So the one thing that the pandemic has done is that it has allowed everybody to answer the question, which previously was only answered typically by entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
Which is, if I can't do it this way, how do I do it? And entrepreneurs are regularly asking that question, right?
Yeah.
Whereas corporates, because they sit in a stable environment, have never had to ask this question.
Yeah.
And so suddenly, for resisting work from home, and for years, companies were paying people to work from 9 to 5 and they would pay you as long as they could see you.
Yeah.
It didn't really matter whether you did any work or not, but they had to be able to see you. That was very important, right? So they paid for hours. And now companies are having to pay for output.
Yeah.
And many companies don't know what your output was, and so they don't know how to pay you. Yeah. And so a lot of old companies are stuck. So on the one side, pandemic has changed the way we work, and it's brought forward changes. And the companies that adapted the best are the younger companies who know the value of what you create and are willing to pay you based on output.
Yeah.
The old companies are still stuck in paying you based on hours. So that's sort of problem number one that is coming to grips. In terms of the economic impact of the pandemic, it's made a lot of people very rich.
Yeah.
Look at the stock market. We talked about Zoom. Look at the valuation of Zoom. Look at the valuation of all the e-commerce companies.
Yeah.
Right? Which means that all the people who work in the e-commerce companies, look at the amount of work that's going to logistics companies.
Yeah.
So, the economists call it a K economy, and it is really very much a K economy. There are some people who have done very well, and it's, just up for them.
Yeah.
Because stock markets, certain people who in Malaysia, people who invested in the glove stocks, etc., done phenomenally well.
Yeah.
The e-commerce companies have done well, but then the restaurants, the hotels, the people working in supermarkets, so a lot of people have been badly impacted by the pandemic, and it's going to take a long time to see really what the impact is going to be.
Yeah.
So I would say that it's been very painful for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And the whole shift of working from home has exposed a bunch of people to the fact that they're not relevant.
Yeah.
Because they're sitting at home and they have nothing to do.
Yeah.
And that's painful for a lot of people, right? Because they used to go to the office, they used to have jobs, and their jobs were watching other people do jobs, or collecting information that other people were collecting or collating. And so a lot of those sort of middle level jobs have disappeared in the pandemic because you don't need these people, right?
Yeah.
And so that's been painful for them. And the question is, how will they be reabsorbed is something that we need to see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On the flip side, there's a tremendous amount of money that's been created. I think more money has been poured into startups in the last 12 months than in the previous probably 24. There are so many companies now have raised money from investors they've never met.
Yeah.
I mean, if you go back 3 years and ask an investment fund to invest in your company, they'd want to see you, they'd want to come to your office, they'd want to have coffee with you, they'd want to do all these things.
Yeah.
In the last 12 months, we've had IPOs where people haven't met.
Yeah.
We've had acquisitions but people haven't met. We've had many fundraisings where people haven't met. So people have adapted to a new way of working.
Yeah.
It's very hard to see what the outcome is going to be. I mean, I really, crystal gazing is not something that I can see. But what I will tell you is that Elon Musk, I think it was Elon Musk who made this statement, which I think is very profound. And he said, look, it doesn't matter when something is going to happen, right? So you have a forecast of when is it going to happen, right? It's going to happen in 10 years or 15 years or 20 years.
Yeah.
But he said that as you look at forecasts, is the gap getting shorter or wider? In other words, is the future coming to you faster or slower?
Mm.
And that's the key thing. You have to be able to understand, is the future coming to you faster? In other words, 10 years ago, you said this won't happen for 30 years.
Yeah.
And then 5 years ago, you said it won't happen for 10 years. And then now you're saying it won't happen for 2 years. Gap is getting smaller.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's something that is something that all companies need to watch.
Yeah. Yeah. So do you feel like the economy will recover from the COVID situation? And
it's always recovered, Zara. Which economy hasn't recovered, right? So, we had the crash of 1929, and that time Rockefeller was the richest person in America.
Yeah.
And his son, I think, was gifted, Rockefeller Jr. was gifted $500 million by his father.
Yeah.
He took it up to $1 billion, and at the crash was down to 200 or 300 million.
Yeah.
But so from a macro perspective, economies always recover.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The question is, where's this benefit reallocated?
Yeah.
Is it reallocated to the same people or different people?
Mm.
So the economies will always recover.
Good.
People will always exist. It's a question of, is your lifestyle going to be the same or is it going to be different? That, I think, obviously will change.
Yeah.
And Arundhati Roy actually did a wonderful talk right at the beginning of the pandemic, where she said that this is something that we have to emerge from and emerge differently. But I don't think we are. She said the pandemic was really an opportunity for us to reset our priorities, to reset our goals, to reset how we treat the environment, how we treat people.
Yeah.
We can hope for that, but I
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Take it as a positive.
We look at the positive. Look at, aren't there another 10, 20, 30, 40 home food home food suppliers in the UK, or cake suppliers? I mean, there's so many new businesses that have emerged.
Yeah.
And some of them are emerged. Some of them have come from people who've been laid off, and others have come from just circumstance. A lot of them have come from the fact that these are skills that they have,
Yeah.
and because they need an income and they're not employed, they can pursue this.
Yeah.
It kind of goes back to the whole passion, and
Yes, it goes to passion, goes to competence as well, right?
Yeah.
And it also goes to the fact that learning has changed. In the old days, you would go to university for 3 years or 4 years or whatever it is, and you would hold off earning until you finish,
Yeah.
right? To university, I was unusual in that both summers that I was at university in Newcastle, both summers I worked in companies that were related to the area that I studied. So I studied naval architecture, and the first summer I worked in a marine architecture design firm. And the second summer, I worked in a company that supplied access equipment to ships. So they were both related. Yeah. But a lot of people end up working in unrelated areas, right? And then I don't know about the UK, but I think in the US, about 10 or 12% of graduates end up working in the field that they studied in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you have this very strange system of education where you work part-time at something which you're not studying.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then you spend 3-4 years studying in order to earn. But then you don't earn in the area that you studied. So why study?
Yeah.
Very true.
And so for a lot of, so for a lot of people, it's not going to make sense to study. And when everything goes online, when it becomes bite-sized, modularized,
yeah,
do we really need so many universities?
Mm.
Universities today are limited by their physical capacity, right?
Yeah.
When they don't have a physical constraint, and in what I call an unboxed world, if they don't have a physical constraint and they can have 1 million students,
yeah,
why would you go to a third-tier university for 6 modules when you can go to the best university in the world for the same price?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so what's going to happen? Do you really need an economics professor in every university in the UK? Do you need a whole faculty? I mean, maybe there'll just be 5 faculties in the UK, and then everybody else will disappear. I don't know. But there's going to be a big disruption in that area.
Yeah.
Because it makes no sense to put away your earning capacity for 3 to 4 years.
Yeah.
The new method that I think is going to come, which is you're going to learn, you're going to do, and you're going to earn.
Yeah.
And so you're going to learn, earn, do, and you're going to go through this cycle. In UK, I think education is still relatively cheap compared to the US. In the US, a lot of students end up with student debt. And then you're saying to yourself, what's the point of taking student debt, right?
Yeah.
Let me do 6 modules, go and work in what I wanted to work at, that I can be good at, and then keep discovering, keep getting better and better. And so it's going to disrupt the universities.
Yeah.
But it's also going to disrupt hiring, because the hiring managers are saying, oh, Anwar doesn't have a degree. I don't think I can hire him. So who do I go and work for, right? You're going to work for somebody else who doesn't look and ask for a degree.
Yeah.
Willing, and so there is a, and for a lot of professions, I mean, I can understand medicine and some other professions, you want to have that rigor. But in a lot of other professions, you don't need this 3 years, 4 years programs.
No. Yeah.
Nobody goes to baking school or cooking school in order to start a restaurant anymore, right? They just start it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So learning is going to be the same.
Yeah.
I think that's
whether you're doing computer programming, or you're doing marketing, or you're doing, I don't know, you're just going to do it, learn a bit, do it, learn a bit, earn some money, and keep doing it and keep getting better and better.
Yeah.
So there's I think big disruption coming in learning.
Yeah, no, I think that's why I don't know how it is where you are, but in the UK, apprenticeships are becoming a much bigger thing than they've ever been. I think that whole idea of learning on the job, that you don't need to hit the books for 3-4 years and then see the real world. You can have them both next to each other. I think that's
But those guys also need to change, right? Because so they need to modularize the learning. So you're not just learning on the job.
yeah,
No, so you're going to learn, and then maybe you do 2 weeks of class a month. Not 2 weeks, you'll do 2 days of class a month.
Yeah.
And then you'll do another 2 days of class a month. And it could be you're doing it out of Edinburgh, and next week you're doing it out of, or next month you're doing it out of London, and then next month you're doing it out of UCLA. I mean, it's all going to become available to you.
yeah,
Yeah.
And so you'll pick the one that works for you, that makes sense for you. So
Yeah.
there is big disruption. I personally think there's big disruption coming at the university.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And you mentioned Elon Musk earlier, and recently saw about the new Tesla bot that's come out, and robots been something that he talked about for so many years, how eventually the world is going to be led by robots and they're going to be doing our jobs. So how do you think artificial intelligence as a whole is developing and affecting the world today?
Do you remember the first time the Japanese came up with a bot, right? And the whole world, I can't remember the name of the Sony, I think, came up with a bot, and it was just for demo, right?
Yeah,
It would just move something from somewhere to somewhere.
yeah,
And then they have these artificial, you have these artificial intelligence demos that are being done online, right? So for
Yeah.
makeup or lipstick, you don't need real people anymore, right? You can have an avatar, and then you don't need to worry about getting the lighting right and getting the camera angle right. You just have avatars, and they do it that way. I think artificial intelligence, there are a few things, right? So the first phase was programming logic.
yeah,
So you would program the logic, and it would run through all the permutations and give you the answer.
yeah,
And when IBM created Big Blue and it it won at chess, that was it, right? So it was a program. They had 40 engineers sitting around there. They'd run through every permutation. Then you started to find that there were people building algorithms that were learning structured data. So
Yes.
it was still an algorithm. You were still feeding it structured data, and it was learning, right?
yeah,
Now you have algorithms that are learning unstructured data. So you just keep chucking data, and it's learning.
yeah,
And Peter Thiel invested in a company called DeepMind,
yeah,
which was subsequently acquired by Google, right?
yeah,
And Peter Thiel invested in a company called DeepMind, and DeepMind produced a software called AlphaGo.
yeah,
And AlphaGo plays plays Go, right? So AlphaGo plays Go, and I remember, I can't remember when it was, but 6-7 years ago, it beat the world champion, the Korean Lee Sedol, 5 games. It beat Sedol 4-1.
oh, okay,
And after the game, Sedol said, "I think I have met the god of Go," because he was just blown away, right?
yeah,
Because it made a move that was so human, so unpredictable. It caught Sedol completely by surprise,
yeah, yeah,
and he didn't know how to react, right? So Go has several more hundred permutations compared to chess, because the pieces, so it's you can't program it, right? It has to learn itself.
yeah,
And the guys who built it, they started building a video game, which then evolved into this machine to play Go.
yeah,
And after they beat Sedol, I think they closed down the project. But Peter Thiel said that he is actually frightened by the pace at which AI is developing. And he says that people who are not in this area just don't understand how fast this is going. And we talk about singularity, where machine and man can think the same.
yeah,
Singularity may come.
Yeah.
I mean, I may not see it. You guys might see it. And there's an Israeli author called Yuval Noah Hariri, who wrote a series of books. And one of the more recent books he wrote was Homo Deus. And in Homo Deus, you can be part machine and part human.
yeah. Wow.
And he raised the issue, which I thought was quite fascinating. He said, right now, we have this moral restraint, which says that if you lose a hand, I should be able to medically give you back the hand, but the hand should be no more powerful than the old hand. And so if you lose an eye, I should give you back an eye, but it shouldn't be more powerful than the old eye, right? But this is a moral line that people are saying, right? He says once science and medicine pushes its boundaries, why won't you opt to change your eye? Why won't you opt to change your hand? Why won't you opt to change your ear?
Yeah.
Because you can get such a better one, right? And so there comes a point where there's this moral issue that needs to be discussed by technologists.
Yeah.
And he talked about, Yuval Harari talked about, you need to program the car that if it's faced with a pregnant woman, a child, and an old man, and killing the driver, who does it kill? Because once you set, you have to set it because it cannot make a decision, right? You need to be able to tell the machine.
Yeah.
And the moment you tell it, that outcome will happen because you've programmed it.
Yeah.
And so there are fascinating questions that will be left for your children to answer. And I wish your children luck in answering the question.
Well, even like changing an arm and stuff, there's even, you can change the genetics of a baby before it's born. I know there's a lot of laws against it, but science, it's kind of unpredictable.
Yeah, I mean, there's the case of the South African runner, right? Beatrice, who applied to run in the Olympics. And the Olympic Committee had to think about, does his prosthetic leg give him an advantage over a human leg?
Yeah.
Valid question, right? And today you get these exoskeletons, and you see them in the warehouses, right? You put them on and it gives you a little bit more extra power to lift something. Iron Man might just happen, right? Why not?
We might be multiple Iron Mans, not just one then.
Yeah, and in fact, and that's what Peter Thiel actually talked about once. And I was listening to his interview, and he said that there could come a time where machines cohabit with us.
Yeah.
And the machines are going down a track, and there's a human, and the machine says, it's not worth expending the energy to move aside for Ali, so I'll just run over him. I mean, these are fascinating conversations, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So overall, do you think all this artificial intelligence is there to benefit us or replace us?
Nobody has the answer to that. It's the old age question of, where it was dynamite created for good or for bad? Was the knife created for good or bad? There is much good in it, and there is also much bad in it.
Yeah.
The thing is, you can't stop technology because you can't unilaterally agree that everybody is not going to use it. Somebody will leak and somebody will use it.
Yeah.
And then when that person uses it, then that person has an advantage, or that company has an advantage. And then of course you can't stop it, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So take care of the world, huh?
Yeah.
Try.
you have big responsibilities.
Yeah.
So how does it happen that one person becomes able to dominate an entire business sector?
You mean as in a monopoly, like
Yeah.
like you have, for example.
Oh, he can just take over the whole sector, and there's not many people able to compete with him.
Okay, so Elon Musk is a different. A different scenario, right?
Yeah.
Elon Musk is just an exceptional person, and what he's doing, for example, now with building reusable rockets, is an example of, you have reusable planes, right?
Yeah.
You don't take a plane, go to New York and say, dump the plane, I'll buy another plane when I want to go back to London, right? I mean, nobody does that, right?
Yeah.
But you do that with spaceships, right?
Yeah.
And you do that with spaceships for two reasons. One is that the technology to solve the problem of bringing it back didn't exist.
Yeah.
And nobody asked the question for the last 20 years, has it existed? Is it coming? Is it possible? Nobody asked that question. They just said, cannot be done.
Yeah.
Right? Because that cannot be done was a decision that they did an evaluation 20 years ago, and NASA said, not possible.
Yeah.
And they had a good reason as well. A, the technology did not exist, and B, to bring the rocket back down, you need to save some fuel to re-land it. So that cuts the payload, right?
Yeah.
So they looked at it and said, don't go down this path. Elon Musk came along and he said, technology has changed. Why can't we go down this path, right? So his is a different, is a different scenario. In terms of monopoly, it's when you have a monopoly, you have the ability to experiment without pain to yourself, right?
Yeah.
But you also have the risk that you can exploit the people.
Yeah.
And so it's very difficult. In the Rockefeller in the 1890s, 1880, I think it was, owned 90% of the refining capacity in America, 90.
Yeah.
US had 85% market share of global oil, which was mainly kerosene at that time, right? He kept defending his monopoly as saying that, I can bring prices down because I have a monopoly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you hear that all the time, right?
Yeah.
So you hear that in every company, and part of it is true. The question is the problem is you never know.
Yeah.
Right? So is it right for Google to control 90% of digital global advertising revenue? I don't think so.
Yeah.
And Australia took a very hard line this year and said that unless you're going to distribute some of that to content providers in Australia, we're going to stop you.
Yeah.
And Google came back to the table and said, yeah, let's talk about how much we're going to distribute.
Yeah.
So, you live in the UK, NHS, if NHS was not a monopoly, would it do a better job? I don't think so. I think the problem with monopolies is that the people exploit the monopoly. The monopoly itself, I don't think it's a bad thing.
Yeah.
Because you get economies of scale. And competition isn't always, it's very hard to sort of come to a view on this because the monopoly is run by somebody.
Yeah.
How that somebody works,
Yeah.
what their values are, is something that you don't know. So monopolies have their roles and monopolies come and go, right?
Yeah.
So you're going to see, I wonder whether the advertising monopoly will be broken. I'm not sure on Google.
Yeah.
But Amazon is no longer the sole player in the retail space. In fact, I think the largest company in the world in revenue terms is still Walmart.
Okay.
Or Alibaba Group. So you have, there are massive advantages of being a monopoly.
Yeah. 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 Interesting because policies like the fair trade policy and stuff, they're to kind of, what would you say they're there to kind of stop a monopoly, or what effect do they actually
Yes. No, if you come back to Rockefeller, he built Southern Oil, and in, I think, 1890, almost before 1900s, President Roosevelt passed the Anti-Monopolies Act, and that broke down Southern Oil into different components. So it became Exxon, Chevron, all the component companies. And the irony of it is that he was worth far more after it was broken into pieces than he was when it was a whole. It's just that the market evolved, and suddenly he owned stakes in all these companies.
Distributed,
and they all became massive.
Yeah.
So, it's like saying, can you get at the morality of a man? I don't know.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, very good point there. I want to move on to algorithms, something you also touched on earlier. How are they So how have they evolved to get to the level that like we're on YouTube at the moment? So how's it got to such a level that an algorithm can work to like literally push content out, and how are they used in businesses as a whole?
I mean, again, it's a good and a bad, right? So you have, don't you want to, I mean, who do you choose? Who do you choose as your friends? You choose your friends, people that you like, right?
Yeah,
And so do you want to be pushed to make friends with people you don't like? I mean,
yeah,
it's a natural state of affairs. You want to associate with people that you like, that think the same way.
yeah,
And the algorithm makes it easier.
yeah,
But you have to understand that this is the algorithm behind it, and you are being pushed these choices, right?
yeah,
So if I tell you, Ali, this Saturday you're going to go out with Tom, and next Saturday you're going to go out for a night out with Joe, and then, I mean, you're going to say, why should I do this? I can't stand the guy. No, you got to do it. You got to do it. You got to break the algorithm. So it's difficult. It's difficult.
yeah. No,
It
good.
has its purpose,
Yeah,
but it's just an impossible question to say. So what is it you don't want to be fed choices?
yeah,
Yeah.
You want to be served randomly, which is also possible. I mean, I don't know whether there's a setting in Netflix that you can say that I now want to be, I want you to suggest things that people like me never watch.
yeah.
Might be possible, might be possible.
Mm.
But are you going to enjoy it? Don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for those who don't know, how are algorithms made?
Well, in the case of Netflix, for example, they know Zara watches these programs. They know Zara's age. They know Zara likes these particular programs. And so they know that Anwar watched these two programs, and therefore he should be interested in the other four that Zara watched. But Anwar doesn't know Zara and knows nothing about Zara.
Yeah.
Right? It's just aggregating the fact that A profile did these things, B profile did half of these things, and therefore most likely will want to do the rest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a similarity.
But there's no revealing of data, right? So the two profiles don't know each other.
Yeah.
Mm.
It's just that with the accumulation of more and more and more, the larger the data source becomes, the more accurate the
Yeah.
preferencing and the matching becomes.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's the key, because you can see yourself scrolling on YouTube. You won't click on every single one, but every 3 or 4 you will find yourself clicking on as a
Yeah.
recommendation.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, and in a way, I mean, what's the big deal, right? You read books that people recommend to you.
Yeah.
You make friends with people that people recommend to you. So why are people so upset that now a machine is doing it? I don't understand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to talk a bit about the way the future's going, and obviously we're running out of oil in the world. So how do you think countries who are heavily reliant on oil, like countries in the Middle East, how are they going to be able to move to deal with that impact, that revenue that they get so much from is going to deteriorate over time?
Every forecast that you ever see is always wrong. Every single forecast is always wrong, right?
Yeah.
And it's typically wrong for 2 or 3 reasons, right? It's normally wrong because forecasters like to go with the crowd.
Yeah.
So they'll forecast something which is in the range of what other forecasters forecast, right? So they like to go with the crowd. The second thing that happens is that forecasters, when they make their forecast public, it results in a change of behavior.
Yeah.
Okay. So when the US physicians said that, X million people would die of cancer from smoking cigarettes, it never happened because people stopped smoking cigarettes.
Yeah.
Or cigarettes became less harmful,
Yeah.
right? So sometimes so your forecast that the world will run out of oil, everybody's reacting to it. I mean, I think those who are countries that are heavily dependent on oil,
Yeah.
will find other sources of income,
Yeah.
or they'll go down to lower growth or smaller populations. Now, if you talk about the Middle East countries, there's a very large proportion of non-nationals living there.
Yeah.
If you take out the non-nationals, do you need that much income? You don't, right?
Yeah, that's true.
So you can balance you can balance the number of people with the income. So it's a hard question to answer, but the world has moved, and the rest of the world has moved to a significant amount of renewable energy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's become a alternative source of energy and employment and GDP, etc. California has very, very high levels of alternative energy.
Yeah.
And that's created a lot of employment in solar, in wind, and other sectors.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
So, we can fall. I mean, if you're heavily dependent on oil as an income, then of course you do need to start looking to diversify.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you can also then just reduce the number. It's like instead of having 10 kids, have 2 kids.
Yeah.
You need less money, right? So
What sort of sectors and industries would you say are good ones to get involved in and invest in currently?
I wouldn't be able to give advice on that, but the parameters are always a question of what is your risk appetite and how do you want to allocate? You're not going to put all your money into one sector, right?
Yeah.
So what's your risk appetite? And you're probably going to allocate part of it to different sectors. And we talked before we came on the show about the availability of automated fund managers today.
Yeah.
Where even for very, very small amounts of money, you can allocate your investment across different portfolios.
Yeah.
And that's going to become a very big thing, right? So how you invest money is going to become very, we talked about the algorithms and the bots and changes.
Yeah.
How you invest money is going to change dramatically, and everybody's going to have more control about where you put your money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just on the final few questions then, what advice would you give someone who's never had any business history but wants to start something new, maybe wants to become an entrepreneur? What sort of things should they consider before getting started, and what sort of things should they consider to know how successful, weigh up to know the likeliness of their success in business?
And the first thing I think is to draw up a list of competencies that they have.
Okay.
So, list out 2 or 3 competencies that you have. And then ask yourself, are these competencies sufficient to start a business? Or do I need to, and we talked about it earlier, do I need to find a partner with matching competencies?
Yeah.
Right. So it's about having competencies and then seeing whether these competencies allow you to address a problem or create a company.
Yeah.
And if it can, then it's a question of, do you want to go all in or one leg first or part-time first? Or, we talked about the home businesses in baking or food.
Yeah.
They're not necessarily all full-time.
Would you actually advise someone to become an entrepreneur if they currently have a steady 9-to-5 that is paying the bills?
Zara, it's a personal question, right? So it would seem to be foolish to drop a steady job and decide that you're going to do something if you don't have the competencies, if you have not, checked out the opportunities, etc. So, obviously, no. I would say start being entrepreneurial in your own company. See what you can do differently. Test out your skills in persuading your boss to let you do something different.
Yeah.
So try and be entrepreneurial in your own company. Explore what you can do and don't be tied down by what you can't.
Yeah.
And then spend that time to see whether those competencies that you have can be built into a business outside.
Yeah.
I think that's really good.
So that would be my...
Yeah.
That's really good advice.
Yeah. So would you say, if someone wanted to start something up, they should generally stick with their day job and on the side start working on it, but they shouldn't just overnight just quit and then start and then not know where they want to go with it?
That's right.
Gradual.
I mean, that would be very un-entrepreneurial. That would be more like going to the casino. So that's not risk-taking, that's gambling.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's our final question for today. So it's been so great having you on. Thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to join us today. Really enjoyed it and learned a lot from you. So thank you so much for that.
You're welcome, Ali and Zara, and look forward to seeing you another time.
Yes, thank you for coming on.
All right. Okay,
Yeah.
doke.
All right.
Bye.
Thanks everyone for watching, and we'll see you on the next episode as well.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.